Yes, thank you.
We're now live.
Thank you very much, and good evening, members. It's good to see you all for the first meeting of this year's Licensing Committee. For those who are watching on YouTube, I'm Rodney Bates. I'm one of the councillors for Old Dean and chair for the Licensing Committee this year. And I'm going to introduce the officers as well who are in the chamber, just so that you all know who they are. And I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping matters. So you'll see on the screen, I'm going to take it in order to my right. I will start with Natita Fleet, who is Senior Environmental Health Officer. And then behind me is Francis Soper, who is the Environmental Health and Licensing Manager. Then behind me on this side, in the white, is Paula Barnshaw, who is the Licensing Administration Officer. And then next to her is Helen Lolly, who is an Environmental Health Officer. And you can obviously see Mr. Passion. And in the background is Mr. Scott, who will obviously be doing the note-taking for this particular meeting. Just a couple of admin things. Firstly, we'll see how the meeting goes, but if it looks like we won't be able to finish the meeting before 7 o'clock, at around 6:45, I'm going to have a very short break. I'm aware there's another meeting tonight, but it will just be a short break, just so you can have a stretch. A number of members have privately contacted regarding screen times and meetings. So if we get to 6:45 and I don't think we're likely to finish the meeting by 7 o'clock, I will stop the meeting very briefly so you can have a stretch and do anything you need to do, and we will then resume the meeting shortly afterwards. I don't think we'll be having a problem finishing the meeting before 7:30, but obviously that will depend on all of you. Secondly, at the end of the meeting, I will not be staying in the chamber for the subsequent meeting. I will be going home, so there will be a break of around 10 or 15 minutes while the mayor comes into the chamber and I can then get home, because obviously it's appropriate that only the mayor remains in the chamber for the full council meeting. So there will be a break regardless of when the meeting finishes, just to enable that to happen. Apologies for the preamble, but do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Dan Adams and Councillor Paul Deach.
Members, are there any other apologies that we know about? I think everyone else is here. Okay. If we go on then to the minutes of the last meeting, and there's one item which was that I did actually send apologies to the last meeting, although it was some time in advance of the meeting, so they weren't actually recorded as such. With that exception, are there any other matters of accuracy regarding the last meeting that anyone wants to raise? Can't see any hands, so are you happy that I sign the minutes?
Read.
Meeting?
Read.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see that most people have indicated that. Thank you. If we go on then to, I will sign them now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, if we go on then to declarations of interest, does any member have any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interests with regard to matters to be discussed at the meeting? I can't see any hands up, so I think there are none. That's great. Okay, so if we go on then to item 4, which is on page 7 of your papers, Food Safety Service Plan, and I believe that Francis is going to introduce this for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report brings before you the Food Safety Service Plan for 2020-21. Food Standard Agency requires all food authorities to have a food safety service plan to ensure that national priorities and standards are addressed and delivered locally. And it is a requirement that the relevant member forum considers and approves the plan to ensure local transparency and accountability. So this report presents the plan. It talks about performance of the food safety service in 2019-20 and looks forward to the work programme for 2021 and highlights the impact that COVID-19 has had on the work of the food safety service. The Licensing Committee therefore is advised to resolve that the Food Safety Service Plan 2021 as attached to Annex A to the report be approved.
Thank you very much. Does any member have any questions or comments they wish to raise in regard to that? I can see Councillor White.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask a question of the officer, please, as to how long a business has to be open before it's actually inspected to get its food number? Sorry, I can't think of the right word.
Are you referring to the food hygiene rating? Yes. Premises are required to register with environmental health, and then we undertake to carry out an inspection within 28 days of opening, and at that full inspection we would carry out the food hygiene rating inspection, and the rating would then be awarded to the premises.
Are there any other questions, members, in regard to this item? Okay, I can't see any hands raised. So if we go back to page 7 and look at the recommendation, the Licensing Committee is advised to resolve that the Food Safety Service Plan 2021 attached as Annex A to this report be approved. If you agree with that, can I ask you to raise your hand now, please? And thank you very much. I know that Councillor McClafferty and Councillor Betton couldn't raise their hands there because obviously they're not voting members of the committee tonight, but the rest of you voted unanimously for that, so I won't go on to part of that. Okay, thank you very much. We go on to the Health and Safety Service Plan 2021, which is on page 27. And again, if I can ask Francis just to introduce that item for us.
Thank you, Chair. So this report brings before you the Health and Safety Service Plan for 2020-21. All local authorities are required to make arrangements for enforcement under Section 18 of the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974. And this Health and Safety Service Plan describes how the Council will ensure that national priorities and standards for health and safety at work are addressed and delivered locally. And again, it's felt appropriate that this plan is submitted before the relevant member forum for approval to ensure local transparency and accountability. So the Health and Safety Service Plan looks at the work that was carried out in 2019-20 and the work programme in line with national priorities for 2020-21, and again highlights the impact of COVID-19 on the work of the Health and Safety Service. The committee is advised to resolve that the Health and Safety Service Plan attached at Annex A to this report be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, can I ask, are there any questions or comments in regard to the Health and Safety Service Plan? I can't see any members raising their hands, so I'll go straight to the recommendation on the item. And the Licensing Committee is advised to resolve that the Health and Safety Service Plan 2021 attached as Annex A to this report be approved. And again, can I ask those in favour to please raise your hands? And thank you very much, members. That's been unanimously agreed. We go on now to agenda item 6, Hackney Carriages and Private Hire Vehicle Licensing. And before I ask Paula to introduce this item, just one quick aspect. This item was brought to my attention courtesy of Councillor Skipper, and you remember, members, that at the beginning of the year I said if there were items that members wanted to bring to the committee, you're welcome to do so. Councillor Skipper just beat the deadline for this particular committee. So after I ask Paula to introduce the officer report, I'm going to ask Councillor Skipper if he has any comments, and then I'll invite members of the committee and other members who are joining this meeting to make any further contributions they wish. Okay, if I ask Paula to introduce the report for us.
Hello, good evening. This report is brought before the committee to consider the relaxation of current guidelines relating to age limits for private hire and heavy carriage vehicles. At the present time, they are 3 years, so no older than 3 years to be first licensed. And once vehicles reach 6 years of age, they will be no longer a licensed vehicle. We do have a slight relaxation for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and that's normally we'll extend that to 10 years. Sorry.
That's fine. Okay, Councillor Skipper, is there anything you wish to say first, and then I'll bring any other members of the committee in?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think that looking at the policy and guidance should be brought into line with other boroughs and areas outside Surrey Heath. We seem to have the lowest 6-year level rating compared to other boroughs. And I just feel as though this guidance and review should be brought in line with the others to a minimum of at least 7 years for the time being, and for the policy and guidance to be reviewed at a later date. This will enable those companies to compete with other firms outside the borough, and also keep those companies within Surrey Heath. It's a bit difficult for existing companies with this current ruling within Surrey Heath, as other councils seem to have a 7-year limit or longer. It just due to the current COVID pandemic, it would just provide a breathing space for those companies to actually renew their vehicles over this period of time.
Thank you, Councillor Skipper. Just before I ask any other members to come in, there is an officer recommendation on this, which perhaps covers some of the concerns which you initially raised. And the officer recommendation is outlined on page 41, and it's suggesting that we have a temporary 1-year exemption to the current 6-year vehicle age limit be applied, and that also the licensing committee do, in essence, what you've outlined, which is that we receive a detailed report in order to conduct a full review of the current guidelines and policies, and that may cover your point regarding looking at other authorities. So to some degree, the officer recommendation coming forward is an immediate issue now, and also one for the future. I don't know if that covers your concern or not, but does any other, before I ask Councillor Skipper that, are there any other members who wish to comment about this particular item? Councillor Leach.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think obviously as part of the detailed review, I think the thing that I'd be interested in, and again, apologies for my ignorance on this, is the 6-year or even a 7-year rule. You know, it feels, you know, perhaps a bit arbitrary. So I'd like to know what the rationale for choosing a particular rule is. Is it due to, you know, vehicle safety and the fact that a vehicle over a certain age is more likely to have faults and that has a knock-on safety impact to passengers? Is it related to efficiency and the impact on the environment, for instance? And I suppose the other thing that I'd like to at least consider as part of the follow-up detailed review is, should there be more of a preference given to alternative fuel vehicles in light of the environmental emergency that was declared? And actually, should we be considering those kind of factors as opposed to theoretically having old, dirty, smelly, you know, diesel cars allowed to be private hire vehicles for a long period, if that makes sense?
I think it does, Councillor Leach. I'm going to ask Paula to answer that question for you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Leach. I fully agree. I think that we need to look at vehicle emissions, and the 6-year rule has been in place for quite some time. It was initially, I think, because newer vehicles are going to be safer. They have far more of the new safety implements inside the vehicle. So that's initially why it was 6 years, I think. But I agree fully that we need to have a look at the report, and actually hybrid vehicles, lower emissions, you know, the rest of the London, for instance, they're going to be going for ultra low emissions and, you know, completely fully electric taxis. I don't suggest that that's what we have for Surrey Heath. We don't have the infrastructure, but I think that's the way forward. I hope that answers your question.
And also, it should be pointed out, which is actually in the report, that there are some vehicles that people can apply for exemptions for things such as if they're capable of carrying a wheelchair. So there are some exceptions beyond that as well. Are there any other members that have any questions or comments regarding this item? I can't see any. I haven't had an alternative proposal, so I'm going to move to the officer recommendation, which is outlined on page 41. And the committee is advised to resolve, little 1, a temporary 1-year exemption to the current 6-year vehicle age limit rule be applied, and little 2, the licensing committee receives a detailed report in order to conduct a full review of the current guidelines and policies relating to taxi licensing within the next 12 months. Can I ask if you're in favour of that to please raise your hand now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, that's, thank you members, again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. I'm going to come now to item 7, and that is on the supplementary papers. There are 2 supplementary papers for this particular matter. I'm not sure who's introducing it. Is this? Oh, this is Helen. Helen's going to introduce this item for us. Yes, thank you very much if you can do that.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to, as part of my presentation, to bring out a couple of significant additional information that members may be interested in. Oh, sorry. Right. The Business and Planning Act 2020 received royal assent on the 22nd of July, which was last Wednesday. Part 1 of the Act, new provisions relating to pavement licences and alcohol licensing, came into force on the same day. Businesses can now apply for a pavement licence from the local authority to put furniture on a relevant highway adjacent to their premises. A further very significant provision allows for an extension of off sales to all licensed premises. This is only for noting that particular point, as no further action is required in that respect. These changes are in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to allow relevant businesses to maximise their capacity whilst adhering to social distancing requirements. Last-minute amendments to the Business and Planning Bill, which are included in the Act, confirm that the functions under Part 1 are non-executive. We are therefore seeking delegated authority for the head of community to determine applications for pavement licences. Further delegated authorities are being requested with regards to remaining licence provisions. And we are also recommending that a fee for a pavement licence be set at £100, and this is the maximum allowable under the Act. Although there is no formal provision for an appeal against the refusal of an application in the Act, we are also asking the committee to confirm arrangements for an formal appeal process. The report itself sets out the application process and the information required as part of the application, and the Act is fairly specific in that regard. There is provision in the Act for a 7-day public consultation on the application, starting on the day after the application is received. The Act itself only specifies that the Surrey County Council, in their highways capacity, should be consulted formally. However, we are planning to consult informally with ward councillors, parish town councillors, environmental health, planning, fire and rescue, and the Surrey Police. We've worked over the last couple of weeks to put arrangements in place to consult ward councillors by email to make it as easy as possible for you to have the opportunity to make representations if we were given the approval and the go-ahead tonight. A covering letter directs councillors to public access where details of the application can be found. Representations may be used by members using public access. It would be appreciated if councillors or anyone wishing to make a representation use public access, as information will then be linked to the case of consideration. At the end of the consultation period, there is a further 7 days in which the application must be determined. At this stage, we can either approve or reject the application. An important consideration is that when we are determining an application, we will give consideration to the needs of disabled people and the recommended distances for access by disabled people as set out in government guidance. Government guidance also sets out the circumstances in which we can enforce or revoke a licence, and this may provide some reassurance to members. The sorts of things that we can reject or revoke a licence include the breach of condition, risks to public safety, unacceptable obstructions to the public highway, the use of the areas as for pavement licence purposes is causing antisocial behaviour or a public nuisance, or where all parts of a relevant highway become unsuitable for the purposes for which the licence has been issued. On our part, if we fail to determine the application within the 14-day period, the applicant will deem to have received consent. These are temporary changes which come to an end at the end of September 2021. There are, however, provisions in the Act for the Secretary of State to extend this period to mitigate the ongoing effects of coronavirus. And I think at this stage it's difficult to know whether that will occur. To support businesses, we have added a new page to our website with links to guidance for businesses, a template for a site notice which must be put out on the premises, and a list of conditions. These were circulated, copies of these paperwork was circulated with earlier this afternoon. We're planning to record pavement licenses in a register, which will be available to view on our website. Since this new piece of legislation came into force on the 22nd of July, we have received 2 applications for a pavement licence, which are now in the 7-day consultation period. These changes are now in force, and we would be grateful for your support for the requested delegations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I ask for any comments or questions, some of you will have recognised a lot of this report because it did, of course, go to the executive, but there was a change at the last minute, which meant that although the executive have considered that much of this matter already, it was then deemed at a later stage that it needs to be dealt with by ourselves. So in essence, that's why you have the report before you today. Are there any questions or comments from members? Okay, there's one item that we do need to clarify as a committee, and that is in regard to the appeals mechanism, which is outlined at the bottom of the recommendation. And I did, members, send round an email outlining certain options for you, and I copied in the group leaders to that. And to clarify, we have a slightly unusual situation because obviously the executive head of community, who is also the interim chief executive at this time, and therefore we need to ensure that hopefully in the unlikely event of an appeal being necessary, that there is a clear separate appeals opportunity for people, and therefore we just need to identify what that might be. In discussion with officers, it's felt that there does need to be some degree of member input into that process, and therefore the suggestion is either that we have a formal subcommittee of members, a bit like we have for licensing subcommittees that many of you will have served on, which would be 3 people and a formal meeting, and trying to arrange it in a kind of formal way with all of the notice periods, etc., that are with that. Alternatively, we come up with a slightly different way, which I have outlined to you privately, which is a bit of a slight hybrid scheme. So what that would mean would be that the official officer delegation would be to the head of legal services, but that there would be member input into that. So in essence, 3 members of the committee, which would usually be myself, the vice chairman, and one other member of the committee who is not from the ward in question, would then be in essence sent the appeal in writing, sent the original decision in writing, and asked the form of view over the next 24 hours and respond back to the head of legal, so that we don't need to arrange a formal meeting with all the notice. It's done quickly, and the head of legal can then make a decision in effect based on the majority of the 3 members' decisions. I should stress we are not expecting there to be many appeals, but we honestly don't know. This is a new piece of law and legislation, and we have to put a process in place, but this process may never be needed. So I don't know if any members have any views about either of those 2 options. I can't see any member expressing any great view on that. So in which case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend that we go, I'm going to recommend a particular suggestion, and then I'm going to word a recommendation accordingly. So the recommendation I want to just seek your advice on is that I work with the vice chairman of the committee and officers, so that we look at this kind of hybrid option that I've outlined. So in essence, the head of legal would be the appeals, the person conducting the appeal, but with member input. But the actual recommendation that I'm going to put to you, which will replace the bit where it says the committee is also asked to confirm, and the recommendation which I have sent around to you earlier this week, is that the head of community, services, or executive head of community, be delegated responsibility to finalise and implement a detailed appeals process in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the licensing committee. Would you, are you happy if we do that?
Yes.
Members, if you're happy with that, just raise your hand or put your thumbs up, whichever you are comfortable with. Thank you. Is there any member who is unhappy with that? There's one member who didn't vote in that. Is there any member who wishes to vote against that? Okay, so I think that was.
Abstentions.
Is there any abstentions? Okay, so that was unanimous, although one member declined to vote. So that's we'll do that then. So we'll work it in that kind of way. So we'll draw up a scheme, and I'll work with Councillor Chapman on that and officers. But that, in essence, will be the process. And we'll get something drawn up, and we will circulate that round to you, so you are aware of what that is, and we'll make sure that group leaders are aware of that as well. Thank you very much for that. If we go on then to item number 8, and this is just an information item in regard to an urgent action that took place in March of this year. I don't propose to ask the officers to give a verbal report. Are there any questions or comments about that? Can't see any. No. So can I just ask that we're advised to note the urgent action taken under the scheme of delegation of functions to officers. Can I just ask those in favour of that, can just raise your hand or thumb? Thank you very much, and that is unanimously noted. If I go on to item number 9, that's to licensing subcommittee minutes, to receive and sign the minutes of any licensing subcommittee hearings held since the committee's last meeting. There was one that took place on the 31st of March. And just members, that was, I believe, the first in the country held under Zoom. So we have a little bit of history there. I'm not aware of any other one that took place before then, because the rules came in only a day or so earlier. So a little bit of history for the three of us who did that particular committee, and also to Ms. Batten as well, who participated, Mrs. Blanshaw. So members, are you happy if we receive and sign the minutes of that particular subcommittee? Can I ask those in favour to raise your hands? Thank you very much. Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. So that has been agreed unanimously. And then item number 10, to Licensing Act summary of decisions, to report decisions that have been taken in respect of licence applications. And there's Annex A with some details about that. Does any members have any questions or comments about that? I can't see any. So if I can go back to the recommendation on page 55. So to report those decisions that have been dealt with under powers delegated, and we're advised to note the report. Can I just ask that those in favour of noting the report raise their hands? Thank you very much. That's unanimously agreed. And the final item, which means that we don't need a break tonight, we'd be pleased to know, is the committee work programme on page, which came round on the separate report. So at the moment, we have a meeting scheduled for the 21st of October 2020, where it's proposed that we discuss Hackney carriage and private hire fees and charges, and statement of licensing policy consultation, and a further meeting on the 3rd of March 2021, which would be the statement of licensing policy, street collections policy, and an item that I've asked to put in, and officers have agreed, which is that we receive an annual report from the licensing and environmental health teams. So that will be done in March of next year. And then, although we
Can't hear you, Rodney.
okay, apologies for that. Even when I'm the chairman, I get cut off. So there we go. I'm sure that was completely accidental. So I was really saying about the work programme, and there's obviously one other item which we have agreed tonight. That will be in the work programme for the summer of next year. So the summer of July or June, July 21, when that licensing committee will take place. And that will be the 12-month review. Members, I did ask if there were any other items that members wanted to bring in the same way that Councillor Skipper brought one. Are there any items that members wish to add now? I can't see any. If there are, then do let me know, or the Vice Chairman or Mr. Scott, and we can then add them into the work programme. But at the moment, can I just ask for your agreement with that the work programme as outlined is agreed for the rest of this year. Can I ask you to vote in favour of that if you're happy with that? And I think everybody is, so that's good news. Okay, members, thank you very much for your indulgence. You have a bit of a break now, so please go and get some dinner and the rest, and I shall see you all later. Thank you very much.